Hey, everybody, welcome back to Reason and Theology. We are continuing our series here, Basics of Biblical Hebrew, Lecture 16, joined by our instructor, Louis Dizon. Louis, how goes it in Canada?
Oh, everything is peachy over here. It's in the fall already, so things are starting to cool down,
Okay.
which is nice.
Yeah,
Yeah,
awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to this one. As usual, I'll just turn it over to you, and if you have anything you want to share, just let me know, and I'll add it
yeah.
on the screen here.
Actually, yeah, I actually wanted to include in the link another song.
Mhm.
Um, so I'm gonna send you the link to that. And
Okay.
you mentioned that we can't play it on the air.
Yeah,
So what I'll
they'll
just do
flag it as
is,
a yeah.
yeah, because today we're going to talk about the Hefil and the Hofal stem. And it just occurred to me there's this fun little Hebrew song. It's called Hivinu Shalom Alechem. Since you came from Israel, I wonder, you're probably familiar with this one, eh?
It doesn't sound familiar offhand,
Yeah,
but I wonder if I know the tune.
yeah, it's Hivinu Shalom Alechem.
Yeah.
Hivinu
Okay.
Shalom
I know the
Alechem.
tune.
So
Yeah.
it's a
I
popular
didn't know the
Israeli
lyrics,
song.
but yeah.
There you go. It's yeah, but Hivinu actually is an example of the kind of stem we're going to talk about. And I sent you the link in the private chat.
Yeah, I added it.
Hivinu is actually related to the word bo, which you recall in the Kal stem is to come. Now, Hefil is actually a causative, so Hivi is the Hefil form of bo, which means to cause to come, or in other words, to bring. So Hivinu Shalom Alechem in Hebrew means we bring peace to you.
Hmm.
Um, so I'm just gonna include that song in the notes so that people can listen to it and they can enjoy an example of Hefil in musical format.
Awesome. Well, I went ahead and added
Now,
it. Mhm.
yeah, and now I can do the share screen so we can get to the lesson proper.
Okay.
Um, Alrighty then. Um, so what we'll do is I started doing a little bit of Genesis 1 in addition to the workbook, and I placed that in the beginning. So if you recall, last time we read day 3 of the Genesis narrative, which goes up to verse 13. So today we'll read a bit of day 4, and we'll actually run into a few he feels along the way. So you're gonna get an advance. You'll see the he feel in its natural habitat, you could say. So in verse 14 it says, "Vayomer Elohim Yahi me'orot birkia hashemayim l'havdil ben mayim l'mayim." Ben hayom uven halayla, v'hayu ha'tot lotot ul moadim ul yamim ve'shanim. So, and God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse or the firmament of the heaven to divide." So Hivdil between the day and between the night, and let there be and let them be signs for seasons and days and years. So is the creation of the heavenly bodies. You can see Lehavdil, which is the Hethel form of Badal, which means to divide, um, and it's in the infinitive construct. And then verse 15, V'hayu lim orot birkia hashemayim l'ha'ir al haaretz vahichen. And there were, and let them be, as light sources in the expanse of the heaven, to give light upon the earth, and so it was. So the ha'ir, so ha'ir is the hefil form of to give, of or to give light, and again it's in the infinitive construct. We got four more verses here. Verse 16, Vayas Elohim et shne ha-meorot ha-gdolim et ha-maor הגדול לממשלת היום, ואת המאור הקטון לממשלת הלילה, ואת הכוכבים. And God made the light sources, the great two great light sources, the larger light source or the great light source to rule over um, the day, and then the smaller light source or the lesser light source to rule over the night and the stars. Note Lamem Shelet, that is a from Mashal, um, to rule over, and I believe it's, let me see, it is functioning as a participle, but I don't recognize um, the stem off the top of my head. I'll have to double check that. But it's definitely a participle form of mashal. Um, verse 17, Vaiten otam Elohim birkia hashamayim lehair al haaretz. And God gave them in the expanse of the heaven to give light upon the earth. So there's lehair again. And then verse 18, Olim shol bayom ubalayla ולהבדיל בין האור ובין החושך וירא אלוהים כי טוב. And to rule the day and the night, and to divide between the light and between the darkness. And God saw that it was good. So the Habdil again here. And verse 19. Vayerev vahivocher yom revi'i. There was evening, there was morning, the fourth day. So we have now read 4 days of the Genesis account in the original Hebrew. We'll do day 5 in the next lesson. For now, let us switch tracks a bit to discuss the He, Fil, and the Hophal. Now you have just seen a few examples of what the He, Fil, and the Hophal are, but what exactly are they? So the best way to understand both the He, Fil, and the Hophal are that they are causative. But you may remember PL, Pual, Hitpael, which we discussed in the last lesson, also have a causative connotation. The difference is that the PL and the Pual and the Hitpael have to do with causing a state of being. And when you translate into English, it usually, the causative connotation tends to not carry over into translation, whereas it is more likely to do so in He, Fil, but even then it not always does so. So He, Fil, and Hophal have the connotation of causing an action. So you take any verb that would normally appear in the Kal, turn it into a He, Fil, and it has to do with causing the Kal version of that same verb to happen. So to give an example, we just saw, we just talked about the song Hivinu Shalom Aleichem. So bo in the Kal stem means to come. Hivi in the He, Fil stem is to cause to come, but because to cause to come is a somewhat of a bulky phrase to say, we usually would translate into English as to bring. So you can say we cause peace to come to you, but a lot simpler if we just said we bring peace to you. So Hophal is simply the passive version of the He, Fil. So if we took another example, Shama, in the Kal stem, it would mean he heard. In the He, Fil, Hishmi would be like he caused to hear. And then the Hophal is he was caused to hear. And you can look at this little table. It will give you an idea of how each stem functions. Now you can see that they are they all have that general connotation. So He, Fil is the active, and Hophal is the passive, as I already mentioned. It's just repetition of the same thing. And just like all the other stems we talked about, There are four basic forms that you're going to need to remember, and they are the he feel is generally fairly easy to recognize. Um, Whenever you see hirek yod between the second and third roots, you know it's a he feel. But watch out, even though every hirek yod there indicates a he feel, not every he feel will have the hirek yod. As you can see in these four basic forms, the infinitive absolute does not have it. Instead, you have a tsere. Um, and what do a tsera and a hirek yod have in common? They are both long I class vowels. So the he feel will always have a long I class vowel, but it won't always be a hirek yod. Um, so if you see the tsere here, there's a pretty good chance that it is either a he feel or a hofal. As you can see, the hofal also has it. Actually, sometimes it also gets replaced with an A class to make things a little bit more confusing. But fortunately, whenever it does, the beginning part will still be there. The It will only usually really occur in the perfect stem, as you'll see later. So you have the he with the hirek underneath for the perfect stem. Now, one example, if in the second person masculine, hiktil would be hiktalta. So you'll notice that the hirek yod becomes replaced there with a patach. But fortunately, this stays in place, and because it stays in place, you're able to recognize it. So that is what you call the theme vowel, as it's mentioned here. Um, and the he, hirek, the he with hirek underneath is the preformative of that same stem. So actually, it's he with a hirek for the perfect here. And you'll notice that in the infinitives, it's a he with a patach. So as it explains here, it's an I class um, in the perfect, and it's an A class everywhere else. So this is why you need to memorize the four basic forms, because it won't always be intuitive at first, but once you have run into enough examples of it, you start to remember what it is. And then the participle, as with the PL, PUAL, and the HIT PL, the first, the preformative becomes a mem. So the hey gets replaced by mem, as you can see. Um, in the PL, it's mekatel. In the PUAL, it's mukutual. Hipel, it's a mitkatel. And the hifil, it's a maktil. In the hofal, it's a moktal. Uh, so when you see a verb and there's a mem on before it, that's usually a pretty good sign that it is a participle of some form or another. And then you just got to look at the rest of the verb to tell what specific type of participle it is. Um, so as with all other participles, once you know the basic form, it's easy to infer all the other forms from it. So if we know that the he feel participle is maktil, you know that in feminine it's going to be maktila. In plural forms will be maktilim and maktilot. Similar with the hofal. Once you know it's a moktal in the singular masculine, you'll know it's moktala in the feminine, and then the plural forms would be moktalim and moktalot. So, other than that, the infinitive absolute will be very similar for both the he feel and the hofal. Let's scroll back up. As you can see, they're very similar to each other. The he feel has a patach and the hofal has a kamets. So that difference in the vowel at the beginning is how you tell them apart. Remember that comets, you might be tempted to pronounce that as an ah sound, but it can also be an o sound. You know it's an o sound because of the name of the stem, hofal. It's not hafal. Um, so ho. So this would be pronounced hoktel. This would be pronounced haktel. And other than that, they can easily be mistaken for one another. In fact, I would imagine that before the Masoretes placed the vowel markers on these verbs, they probably would have been mistaken for each other quite a bit. So let's be thankful that these vowel markers exist now, so we're not liable to make that kind of mistake. And for both infinitive absolutes, you have the tere underneath the second radical. So it will never be a hirek yod. It will always be a tere. So from that description, you should be able to tell how to form a hifil. So the general rule is that it is going to have an I class long vowel after the second root. So hiktil, for example. It's not always going to be that the case, but it's going to be that way for most of the forms. So here is an example where it does not have it. So as I mentioned, in the second person masculine singular, it's hiktalta. So instead of the I class, you have a patach. Um, Now, and in this case, the way you can tell it's a he feel is the hey and the hirek is still there. And it is, and then the hirek yod is also not used in short forms with no endings. That would mean something like the jussive. So if you recall, the jussive and the imperfect are both derived from the basic form of the infinitive construct. The infinitive construct is very important because vast majority of other forms are derived from it. Um, so if you know that a haktil is um, the infinitive construct form, you can infer that the uh, then the that the imperfect form. Sorry, did I say perfect? I meant imperfect. The imperfect form of it would be yaktil, taktil, aktil, etc. However, in the case of the he feel, the jussive and the imperfect are not going to look the same. So you might have gotten used to seeing the jussive and the imperfect as looking very similar to each other. In the call, it definitely is. In most cases, not always, but most. That's not the case in the he feel. In the he feel, you will see that the imperfect and the jussive tend to be different from each other. And they tend to differ in that long vowel that occurs after the second root. So the imperfect form would be tactile, for example, in the feminine form. The jussive would be tactile. So instead of the hirek yod, you have the tere once again. So that's one of the ways that you could tell the imperfect and the jussive apart in the he feel stem, which makes it easier to tell them apart because when they're the same, sometimes you have to use context to tell them apart, and even then, it's not always immediately obvious. So the principles governing the use of the hierarchy in the he feel. So make note of this table. There are two basic principles. One is that the hirek yod does not occur um, along with consonantal endings. So that would include the tav here and the nun he here. Um, Instead, you have an A class in the perfect, and the others have the I class. And then no hirek yod for short ending, no ending short forms, such as the jussive. Um, so here you can see what the different T fill forms are in the perfect. What, you'll notice that um, it's fairly straightforward. So hiktil, hiktila, hiktalta, hiktalt, hiktalti, hiktila, hiktaltem, hiktalten, hiktalnu. So the one thing that they all have in common is the beginning. So if you see that beginning form, you know immediately it's a Hifil perfect. With the imperfect, it will generally have the he with the patach, as you can see here, um, because of its derivation from the infinitive construct. And as it says here, all the other he feel verb forms derive from the infinitive construct. Um, you'll see that the preformative usually absorbs the he. So you wouldn't say yahaktil, you would say yaktil. But sometimes the yod and the he appear together. One example is that sometimes you will see the form Yehoshia, which is the Hefil imperfect form for Yasha, um, to save. So here you'll see that the He has not been absorbed. Now there is a form where it is absorbed. It's Yoshia. So these two forms can both occur in the Hebrew. Uh, but you can still tell that it's a he fail because once again you have the hirek yod after the second root. So as I mentioned, that is, it will always be a he fail if you see that there. And then jussive we already discussed. No need to repeat. The imperative, um, as you can see, is actually formed by removing the preformative tav, and then when you do that, the he reappears. So haktel. This is where again it's bound to get a little bit confusing because, as we have seen, haktel is also the form of the infinitive absolute. Um, so how can you tell if it's an imperative or an infinitive absolute? Look at the context. The context will tell you which one it's more likely to be. Um, and just like with uh, all other imperatives, there isn't one for the Hofal, as you'll see later, because it's passive, and it doesn't generally make sense for there to be a passive um, imperative. And here is the participle. We already discussed that. So the Hofal, um, there are the four basic forms would be uh, Haktal, Hoktal, Haktel, and I think this is a typo because this is not the Hofal form. This is the Nifal form. For that, we have to scroll all the way back up. Let me see. Um, Hoktal, again Hoktal. So the perfect and the infinitive construct are identical, at least in the third person masculine singular. And then Hoktel, and then Moktal. So ignore the typo in the textbook. I don't know why, but it's showing up as an e-file here. Now, in the historic form, actually, it would have been Huktal. It would have had the kibbutz. You remember the three dots arranged diagonally? It doesn't come up very often, but it does. But it's in the verb form. It usually occurs in the context of the pual. So in its historic form, the whole file also had it, but it has changed to a comets. So it's a comets pronounced with an O sound. Um, so a long, long time ago, it would have been hufal, and then became hofal. And once you know those four basic forms, you can basically um, infer all the other forms from it, just like the rest. You have a verb chart here. If you want to see all the possible forms of each verb, all the possible forms of the he feel, all the possible forms of the whole file. But again, aside from the four basic forms, you do not need to memorize all of this. You could, if you wanted to, if you're a bit of a masochist, um, but it's unnecessary because you can always just infer them from these other four forms. Um, so now that we've talked about the he feel and the whole file, we have learned the all of the most common verb stems that are likely to occur in Hebrew. So we've learned the kal, the nifal, the piel, pual, hit, pael, hifil, hofal. Um, and then there are other stems besides that. These are rare verb stems. Um, so there are others besides them that occur much less often. Because of that, they don't get their own um, dedicated chapter. But it's worth knowing that they exist. Now let's look at a few other examples of the He and the Hofal in the Hebrew Bible and how they're used, just to cement your knowledge of this particular stem. So for that, let's turn to the Hebrew Bible insert. We'll see how they are used, and you'll see that how they usually have that causative connotation, but it's not always obvious how they are being used causatively. In Exodus 29:46, it says, "Hotzeti otam me'eretz Mitzrayim." So literally translated would be, "I caused them to go out of the land of Egypt." Um, but more idiomatically, we could just say, "I brought them out of the land of Egypt." And then in Obadiah verse 4, "Misham oridcha." So from there, I caused you to go down, or I shall bring you down. And then you have the double causative. So this just means that there's a um, built-in object in the verb, but there's also a second object here. So an example would be Jeremiah 11:18, as here itani ma'alehem. Then you showed me, or you caused me to see their deeds. So the two objects are me and their deeds. So here E is the he feel form of Ra'ah, to see. So he caused to see, or he showed. And then Jeremiah 18:2. Veshama ashmi'aka et dvarai. So, and there I will cause you to hear my words. Or more idiomatically, I'll make you listen to my words. Shama, of course, in the call means to hear. So hishmi in the hifil is to cause to hear. Now, in Isaiah 29:23, we have hikdish, which is from kadash, to be holy. So to cause to be holy, in other words. So Isaiah 29:23, vayakdishu shmi vahikdishu et kadosh Yaakov. And they shall cause my name to be holy. In other words, they shall sanctify my name. And they shall sanctify the Holy One of Jacob. This is Hebrew parallelism at its finest. So these two clauses are generally saying the same thing but slightly different words. And then there are some times where the causative connotation of he feel seems to be lost. At the very least, you wouldn't be able to tell it's causative when you translate it to English. So, a common example of that would be the hishlich verb, which comes from shalach, to throw. The kal form of it does not occur in the Hebrew, only the he feel does. So, in 2 Samuel 20, verse 12, it would be Vayashlech alav beged, and he threw a garment. He threw upon him a garment. In other places, the kal and the he feel seem to be used um, almost the same way. So seem is an example of that. In the he feel form, it doesn't seem to be functioning any differently from a kal seem. So Ezekiel 14 verse 8, Va hasimotihu laot ve limshalim. I will make him as a sign and as a proverb. So mshalim is the word for proverb. And then intransitive use of the he feel. So it can be either transitive or intransitive. And in Isaiah 7, verse 4, you can see, Hishamer ve hashket al tira. And so these are imperatives. So keep watch. So watch yourself. And then be calm. So be silent. And fear not. Um, and verbial form. So it can also function as an adverb. In Proverbs 14, verse 35, Ratzon melech le'eved maskil. So sachal is to act prudently or to act wisely. So um, his skill is the he feel form, and then maskil is the he feel participle of it. So a servant who acts wisely. And then we have two examples of the whole file here. So Psalm 22:11, Alecha hashlachti hoshlachti merachem. So upon you I was thrown from the womb. So hoshlach is the whole file form of shalach, to throw. Genesis 39, verse 2. Vayosef horad mitzrayma. And Joseph was caused to go down from Egyptwards, or in other words, and Joseph was taken down to Egypt. So these are the he feels and the ho fals, and you get an idea of all the possible ways they could be used in the Hebrew. And we got the reading, we got the translation exercise. Um, So you'll note that when I'm doing the translation exercises, they're generally one chapter before the chapter we discussed in the grammar textbook, so you won't run into any he feels here. You will run into the other forms we discussed though. And to make things simple, um, we're going to parse the non-cal verbs. Whenever a cal verb appears in the text, we're going to um, pass it by. But if it's a nifal, a pl, a pual, and a hitpael, we will make note of that. And here is the vocabulary that you need to learn for the day. So take a good look at it. Pause if you have to. And we will begin translating. I pre-underlined the non-cal verbs so you know where they are. All right, we're doing 22 verses. Lord willing, we should be able to get through this fairly quickly. And this is the part of Genesis where the entire um, uh, the entire family, Jacob and all his sons, have gone down to Egypt and settled there. And Jacob is at his deathbed now, and he's about to give his blessings to Joseph and his sons. So in verse 1 it says, "Vayhi achare hadvarim ha'ele vayomer leYosef hine avicha chole ויקח את שני בניו עמו, את מנשה ואת Ephraim. And so it was, after these things, and he said to Joseph, Behold, your father is sick, and he took the two sons with him, Manasseh and Ephraim, or Ephraim, if you want to pronounce it that way. Verse 2, וידבר ליעקב ויאמר הנה בנך יוסף בא אליך ויתחזק ישראל וישב על המיטה. And he spoke, so this is the PL vital form of diber. And he spoke to Joseph, and he said, Behold, your son Joseph came to you. And he was strengthened, and Israel was strengthened. So Yitchazek is the Hitpael form of Chazak, to be strong. And you see, sorry, this is the Viktal form of it. And so he was strengthened and he sat upon the bed. So he was lying down and he sat upright. And then verse 3. Vayomer Yaakov el Yosef, El Shaddai nir'a elai beluz be'eretz Knaan vayvarech ito. And Jacob said to Joseph, El Shaddai, God Almighty, has shown me. So nir'a is the Nephal form of ra'ah, to see. So it would translate as to show. He showed me Luz in the land of Canaan or Canaan, and then he blessed him. Yivarech is a PL form of Barach, to bless. Uh, and then verse 4. Vayomer elai, pare urve vanetati othal likhal amim vanetati et haaretz hazot lezar'acha acharecha ahuzat olam. And he said to me, be fruitful, multiply, and I will give you um, as an assembly of the people, or to the assembly of the people. Or like, I'll place you in the assembly of the people, and I will give you the land, this land rather. I'll give this land to your seed after you as a possession forever. Um, so this is the promise that God made. Verse 5, Ve'ata shne vanecha hanoladim lecha be'eretz Mitzrayim ad bo'i elecha Mitzrayim li hem Ephraim Manasseh Kir Uven v'Shim'on yihyu li. And now your two sons who were born to you, so noladim, it's the Nephal plural participle form of yalad, so the ones who have been born to you in the land of Egypt, um, until my coming to you towards Egypt. Lihem, to me is them. To me is them, Ephraim and Manasseh. So I have Ephraim and Manasseh. Just like Reuven and Simeon were to me. So he's likening Manasseh and Ephraim to Reuben and Simeon, whom, if you recall, are Jacob's eldest two sons by Leah. And then verse 6, V'yeladecha asher yuldu acharehem lecha yihyu al shem achehem yikaru benachalatam. And your and your children who were born. So yuldu is the pual form of yalad, and it's in the third person masculine plural. They were born after them to you. They were upon the name of your brothers called. They'll be called after the name of your brothers in their possession. So Yikaru is the PL form of Kara, in the imperfect third person masculine plural. You know it's a PL, by the way, because of the dagesh on the kuf. The dagesh on the second radical usually denotes a PL. Verse 7. Ve'ani ve'vo'i mipadan meta alai Rachel be'eretz Knaan ba'derech ba'od kivrat eretz lavo Ephrata ve'ekvor ota sham b'derech Efrat hu bet lachem. And I, when I come from Padan, um, die, like, um, so it's like I'll die. Wait, this has to do with dying upon me. Okay, so died. Rachel died in the land of Canaan. He's talking about the death of Rachel. Um, Along the way, and then still or again, um, Kivrat Eretz. So some of the land to come towards Ephrat, come towards Ephra, and I will bury her, and I buried her there. So he buried her in Ephrata. Along the way to Ephrat, and it is the Bethlehem. Um, so you may recall in Micah chapter 5, yeah, there's the phrase Bethlehem Ephrata. So those two tend to be used as equivalents for each other, Ephrat and Bethlehem. Uh, and then in verse 8, Vayar Yisrael et bnei Yosef vayomer mi ele. And Israel saw the sons of Joseph and said, "Who are these?" Because he's never met his grandchildren before. And then verse 9, Vayomer Yosef el Aviv, uh, Banaihem asher natan li Elohim baze vayomar kachna otam elai va'avarech otam. So Joseph said to his father, "They're my sons, who were given to me by God, or whom God gave to me." Um, in here, in this, um, and he said, "Take," and he said, "Take them to me, and I will bless them." So these are the sons you asked to bring so that they could be blessed. And Avarech is PL from Barak, um, to bless. And then get at verse 10. Ve'ene Yisrael kavdu mi zoken lo yuchal lirot vayavo'u elav vayin vayneshach lahem vaychabek lahem. And the eyes of Israel, um, they were uh, they were heavy from old age. So this could mean either, this usually means heavy, can sometimes mean glorious, but in this case it makes more sense to say it as heavy. He was not able to see. So yuchal here is a pual of yachal, means to be able. He was not able to see, and he came, and they came to him. So that's the two sons. They came towards their grandfather, and he kissed them and he embraced them. So these are both PL forms. Nashach is to kiss, Chavak is to embrace, and they're both Vaiktol, third person, masculine singular. Verse 11, Vayomer Yisrael el Yosef, Ra'o panecha lo filalti, vehine raiti otcha vegam et zarecha. And Israel said to Joseph, "See your face. Um, do not, I do not prostrate. Um, and behold, I saw you, and also your seed." And then verse 12, "Vayetz'u shne banav me'im birkav vayishtachu le'apiv le'apav arza." And the two sons went out from with their knees. It's a little funky syntax going on here. And Berek means knee. by the way, and they prostrated with on their face to the ground. Actually, forgot. So Ishtachavu, remember Hishtachave is its own stem. It's Hishtafel. It's the only one of its kind. Or rather, this verb is the only verb that takes that stem in the Hebrew Bible. Uh, verse 13, Vaikach Yosef et Shnehem et Ephraim bi mino mismol Yisrael ve'et Manasseh bismol miyamin Yisrael Vaikarev otam elav. And Joseph took the two of them, um, Ephraim in his right hand from Israel, from right hand from the left of Israel, and Manasseh on his left hand from the right hand of Israel. That's not confusing at all. And he approached, and he made them come close to him. So Karev, that is a Hitpael form of Karav. So brought close, you can say. Verse 14. Vaishlach Israel et yamino vayaset al rosh Ephraim vehu hatzair et ve'et smolo al rosh Manasseh sikel et yadav ki Manasseh ha uh, ha-bakor. So this is the part where uh, Joseph wants his firstborn to take preeminence, but Israel has other plans. And Israel sent forth his right hand and placed it upon the head of Ephraim, Ephraim being the younger of the two. Yeah, it says he is the little one. Sa'ir means this younger, the little child. And the left hand upon the head of Manasseh, and then and then he crossed his hands, for Manasseh was the uh, elder one. So it's not explicitly stated here, but it's Joseph who wants Manasseh to get the primary blessing. Oh, in verse 15, Vayivarech et Yosef Vayomar Haelohim asher hithalchu avotai lefanav Avraham Vaitzchak Haelohim haroeh oti meodi ad hayom hazeh. And he blessed Joseph and said, the God who uh, caused my fathers to walk. So hithalech is the hitpael form of halach. So he caused my fathers to walk before him. That is to say, Abraham and Isaac. The God who shepherds me from Meodi, as long as I've lived until this day. So in verse 13, verse 16, Hamalach hagoel oti mikol ra yivarech et ha-na'arim ve'kareh bahem shmi v'shem avoti Avraham v'Yitzchak v'yirbu b'kerev haaretz. The angel who redeems, the redeeming angel of me, so the angel who redeems me from every evil. So he's talking about his guardian angel, in other words. Blessed the young men and called them by my name and the name of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac. And then and he made them many in the midst of the land. So talking about how they will be multiplied. Verse 17. Vayar Yosef ki yashit aviv yad yamino al rosh Ephraim vayera be'enav vayitposh yad aviv v'lesit ota al rosh Manasseh. So Joseph does not like the fact that Ephraim is getting the primary blessing. He thinks Manasseh should get it, so he intervenes. And Joseph saw that his father placed his right hand upon the head of Ephraim, and this was evil in his eyes. This should not be. So he took the hand of his father, so he pushes to take, to place it upon the head of Manasseh. So it's like, Dad, what are you doing? You should bless the other son first. And in verse 18, you get the reply. And Joseph said to his father, sorry, it's still Joseph speaking, Vayomer Yosef el Aviv, Lochen Avi, ki ze ha-bechor, sim yamincha al rosho. Joseph is a little irate. He says to his father, it is not thus, my father. For this is the firstborn. Place your right hand upon his head. You've got four more verses, and then we will conclude this reading. Verse 19, Vayima'en aviv vayomer, yadati vni, yadati gam hu yihye la'am ve'gam hu yigdal ve ulam achiv hakaton yigdal mimenu ve'zar'o yihye mlo hagoyim. And his father refused and said, I know, my son, I know. He also will be a people, and also he will be great. Nevertheless, what happened there? Nevertheless, his younger brother, will be greater than him, and his seed will fill the nations. So a little bit of Bible trivia. You may remember if you've read the later historical books and prophetic books, when after the division of the two kingdoms, the northern kingdom of Israel is usually referred to as Ephraim or Ephraim. So Ephraim becomes a stand-in for the northern 10 tribes, and that is because of the blessing that Jacob gave him. Even though he's the younger of the two sons of Joseph, he gains preeminence. So whenever the two tribes are mentioned, Ephraim also always takes preeminence, and he takes preeminence even over several of the other tribes. The only tribe that is not, and he does not take preeminence over, is Judah, because Judah is where you get the Davidic line. And now, three more verses. Verse 20. Vayvarech otam bayom hahu lemor, v'cha yivarech Yisrael lemor, yasem otcha Elohim ke'Ephraim, ve'kim naseh, vayasem et Ephraim lifnei Manasseh. And he blessed them on that day, saying, to you, Israel, will bless, saying, he will place you, God will place you as Ephraim and as Manasseh, and he will place Ephraim before Manasseh. So Ephraim takes preeminence again. Verse 21. Vayomer Yisrael el Yosef, Hine et moti ba vehaya Elohim imachem ve tashuvu el eretz avotechem. And Israel said to Joseph, behold, the time of my death has come, He's gonna die soon, and God will be with you, and He will return you to the land of your fathers. So this is foreshadowing. They're currently in exile in Egypt, but they will return to Canaan someday. And finally, verse 22. ואני נתתי לך שם אחד על אחיך אשר לקחתי מיד האמורי בחרבי ובקשתי. And I will give to you Shechem, uh, one upon your brothers, who I took from the hand of the Amorites, and with my sword and with my bow. So this is the 48th chapter of Genesis, simplified, mind you. Um, there's two more chapters of Genesis that we'll be reading. Um, so that will be Genesis. So that will be for the next two sessions, and then after that, we're also going to read the books of Ruth and Jonah. Um, Note that Genesis 49 and 50 are going to be poetic passages, which means they're going to be a little bit trickier to translate compared to what we've read up to this point. There's an introduction to Hebrew poetry here, which we will look at next time, God willing. So tune in next time where we discuss rare verbs and we'll get our introduction to Hebrew poetry.
Thank you for that, Lewis. And I think we also have another video coming up here where we're going to continue our series on scriptures. So which book are we going over?
Yes, we're going through the book of Judith. By the way, I see an interesting question. A couple of interesting questions. You want me to take those really quickly?
Yeah, go ahead and grab them.
Let me see. The Masoretic text uses different words to describe the rule of the moon over the stars. I believe that is the case. I don't know how exegetically important that would be. So as we saw, mashal is used for the rule of the sun and the moon. And then the word for rule in verse 28 is radah. So yes, it is definitely a different word, and it does have a bit of like a warlike connotation. So that has actually become controversial in recent years because it's some progressive theologians have stated that this becomes like a justification for people to misuse creation. But I think that's reading a little bit more into the text than is warranted. But it is definitely strong language, kavash and radah, used in the sixth day to describe human rule over the rest of creation. And what is the most complex Hebrew thing to translate accurately? I would say it's the poetic portions. Generally, prose texts are easier to translate than poetic texts. So if you translate the Psalms, for example, it's widely stated that Psalms, the book of Psalms, as well as the book of Job, are like the two hardest books of the Bible to translate. And a lot of the times, what happens with these poetic texts is this is stuff I was going to explain next session, and I'll probably repeat all this stuff then, but I'll say it now. One of the issues you'll run into with these poetic texts is you'll be able to identify individual words, like you'll identify all of the individual vocabulary items, but once you start taking them together into larger grammatical units, like phrases and sentences, it can be a little tough to figure out, okay, how do you put all of them together into a coherent clause? For that, sometimes you have to take some time to like read the text, and sometimes you look at the English translations, they don't always even agree on how to translate the text, which tells you even the translators of like the official translations that we often use don't always agree how to translate them. So, yep, that hopefully that will help. And yeah, and I will go over that in more detail next time.
All right. So I will send a link to you here just in a little bit, Lewis, and y'all all look forward to a link that will pop up here on YouTube in just a moment where we'll do our stream on through the scriptures concerning the book of Judith. All right. So we'll see y'all in just a little bit. God bless.